voice of growth, mastering the mind and market.
You know, I grew up without means. My family was very poor. I see success where others see failure. I'm one of these men that just doesn't stay down in the dumps for too long. This limitless positive energy that drives me ahead. Attack, man, like a rabid dog. And if the vision sounds anything like survival or getting rich, then I would then tell them, go back to the drawing board, try again. You're making me blush.
Mark Beres?
Yeah. Are we on camera?
We're on camera.
Holy moly. Okay.
Now,
Manny Turan.
yes, I really love doing this podcast for a lot of reasons.
Okay.
One of the biggest reasons for me, besides giving back and sharing stories to the world about entrepreneurs and all that, is that I get to sit and chat with good friends like yourself. I feel as though you and I were in business together, and then after that kind of all, eroded, we scattered to the wind. But I see you as not only a friend and a mentor, but a business leader. You're a visionary. You are one of the very few true Renaissance men that I know in life. You were in the Air Force. You were graduated from Naval Test Pilot School. You were a principal engineer at the Rocket Ranch here. Mm-hmm. You do a lot, and you're making wine. You are a distiller, master distiller, and now you're jumping into the restaurant space.
You're making me blush.
So everybody wants to know what drives you, what gets you moving.
So I've thought about that a lot over my life. Like, look what drives me. Like, where do I get this energy to just go and go and go and go? And it's a great question. I'd like to ask myself that question and answer it definitively. But ever since I've been young, when I was a young kid, I grew up without means. My family was very poor, but we weren't poor in spirit and mind. I mean, my mom and dad drove me to always excel. And from a very young age, I was held accountable for results. And my friends, though, most of the people I always hung out with always had means. And I was always the kid that didn't, right? So I always had a sort of a chip on my shoulder of having to do more with less. And I always took great pride in achieving results against the odds. I always, favored the underdog. I always rooted for the underdog, and I always pulled myself up by my bootstraps. And for some reason, I just have a drive within me to succeed. I get up in the morning, and all I think about is success. And when a problem presents itself, all I think about is how do I get around the problem or, nullify it, fix it, or whatever. It's just a compulsion I have. So, whether it's the wine business or in the engineering world or distilling or in the restaurant business, it's just a complex array of challenges. But I'm so trained to just through years and years and years of repetitive problem-solving discipline to just attack, man, like a rabid dog, It's just what drives me. Anyway, and then I've got a boundless optimism. So I'm one of these men that just doesn't stay down in the dumps for too long. I have a boundless positive energy in me that just sustains me, just keeps me on the top of that wave surfing, right? And, a lot of friends I have they don't have that positive disposition like I do. They talk about that a lot, and so I'm always driven to create positive energy wherever I go. And so even when things look bad or when the 8 ball is against us or whatever it is, I just have this limitless positive energy that drives me ahead, right? I see success where others see failure. When there's a challenge in front of me, all I see is success. you know? And if there's things in the way, those are just obstacles that I can overcome. You know, if I need to start a distillery and it's going to cost me, $3 or $4 million, okay, that just means I need to go find $3 or $4 million. Doesn't mean I can't do it. I can go do it, provided that I could put the capital together. Putting the capital together, that's a challenge. Okay, how do we do that? Well, how do we form capital? And okay, let's go form some capital. And the people around me are like, well, it just can't be done. I'm like, no, it can be done. We just simply have to go form some capital. Let's get to work. That's an example of just the constant drive to succeed, right? Anyway.
No, I think that's great. I think maybe one of the reasons you and I kind of, coalesce well is I have a very similar idea about the world. I tend to see success through adversity all the time. And I think that sometimes my tank, I wouldn't say gets empty, but it begins to diminish. And then I wake up the next day and it kind of replenishes. And then when I meet somebody like you or I hang out with you, it's like a turbocharge because it gives me hope and really a bit of a push that there's other people that have that infectious, positive energy. And it's not like you're doing it falsely. I mean, I know you well, and this is real. This is your personality, and it's sewn into your DNA. So I really appreciate that.
Well, it's so easy to get down in the dumps. It's just so easy. It because life is not easy. Business is not easy. Just making your way through this world as an entrepreneur. I mean, there's nothing about it that's easy. I guarantee you it's not easy for Elon Musk. I guarantee you, if you were to sit down with the guy, he would probably relay this exact same sentiment to you, that there's nothing about what he does that's easy. It doesn't matter how many billions of dollars you have or how many accolades, there's nothing easy about what he does every day. And so the same mindset is there, right? It's that same thing. And if adversity and challenges cripple you, then it's going to be tough to succeed, right? That's why you hear people talk about, success is a mindset, right? And cliche or not, it is true. It really is true. You tend to become what you think. You tend to go where your mind is focused. And so focus and drive and attitude tend to create successful people.
I've got an interesting analogy because you are a pilot.
Used to be. I'm reformed.
Well, you're reformed.
Yeah.
But one of the things I learned, so I took a tour of the TPD has the helicopter thing there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the pilots said, so they have the pilot and then they have the person in the navigator seat that's operating the machine and all that. And one of the things the pilot said that I found interesting is that he said, when you move your head in another direction, you tend to want to take the helicopter in the same direction. So you got to be real careful not to be looking around too much. Otherwise, you're going to be taking it, in these crazy directions. I think what you just said has some interesting dynamic there in that the mindset, you got to keep focused on that success, because if you detract and you look at, down in the dumps mentality, that's where you're going to go.
That's right. And my view is in our culture today, for whatever reason, I've got my opinion, there's a lot of anger and resentment at successful people, particularly wealthy people, right? And my view has always been, I don't hate those people. I want to learn from them. I want to know how they did it. How did you succeed? What did you do? When you start talking to those people, what you find invariably is this mindset. It's a common thread, right? It's a common denominator. They all share this attitude, right? And anyway, I think it's critically important. Anybody that wants to succeed, whether it's in sports, in business, in their family life, I mean, in any number of things where success is an outcome, right? Their mindset and their attitude are critical. Without them, it's much more difficult to do.
Yeah, that's the center. The two pillars of this podcast are mastering the mind and market. You know, with the mind, you got mindset, you got grit, you got all the internal battles that we face as entrepreneurs on a daily basis, sometimes hourly, sometimes by minute basis. And then you've got the whole market side, which is business trends, operations, HR, legal, all that malarkey, right? Let's take the perspective and let's zone in on the day or the days that you decided to start Flying Leap. Give us some context of what was going through your head at the time and why wine?
So, great question. And I'll try and melt this down. I have an answer for you. At the time that we started Flying Leap, it was a different period of my life entirely. Okay. I was relatively new to Arizona and I didn't really have a network established here yet. I was not alone, but I had a very small satellite around me. And so I was basically kind of like a leaf in the wind. But when I came here, it's just purely chance that I left the military years before my peers left the military. And I left the military at a time when defense contractors needed people, okay? And they needed engineers. Contrast that with today where they just, they don't. But back then they did. So I was trained in defense contracting as a test pilot. Everybody thinks as a test pilot, you're flying all the time. You really don't. You don't really fly that much. Most of your time is spent working with defense contractors on programs. You don't really fly that much as a test pilot. That's a little bit of a thing that people don't really know. So I was already integrated with those folks. I already knew their language, and I was a shoo-in for it, right? And so when I came out here, but there was one problem, Manny. In 2006, 2007, 2008 particularly, it was the Great Recession. Remember that?
I do.
And I don't know if you remember sequestration.
Yes, I do.
Sequestration was this deal where in the U.S. Senate, a bipartisan group of equal numbers of senators got together and said, we're going to iron out a budget. Most people don't realize our government doesn't operate on a budget. Scary thought. But they said, we're going to produce a budget. And they said, we're going to make the consequences of not building a budget so draconian that all of us will give in to create this budget. If they didn't come up with a budget, like there were going to be draconian cuts to the defense budget, and there were going to be draconian cuts to social programs, which were going to hurt people. So they said, okay, we have this motivation to do this. Well, guess what? They weren't able to come up with a budget. So these draconian measures took place. That was called sequestration. Sequestration dramatically impacted the country, and especially defense contracting. When that happened, I immediately assumed that because I was low man on the totem pole, I would be laid off. And so I needed something else to do. But at the same time, I had a girlfriend that I liked, that I'm like, I met someone I really liked that I wanted to stay with and I wanted to build a life with. So I didn't want to leave the area. And I don't have any family here. Yeah. Didn't really have any roots. I didn't have a network here. So I was sort of a foreigner in Tucson, if you will. Pardon me. So I started to look around for something else to do that I could do concurrently with my engineering job. And I had a small pension coming out of the military. So I was like, okay, I can live on this, but I need to stay busy and productive. So I said, wine for me wasn't new. Wine is something that has been a part of my life, my family's life forever, right? I didn't need a fake ID. I made wine. I mean, wine was a familiar world. It was not a new thing for me. And the wine world of wine production, beverage alcohol production, wineries, vineyards, farming, agriculture, this is all stuff that was familiar territory to me. And so it wasn't like a novel Christopher Columbus sailing off into the unknown for me. It was a familiar industry for me. So I naturally thought of it. Okay. And at the time, it seemed like a win-win because there weren't a lot of wineries here. I could grow grapes, sell the grapes to Arizona wineries, and then generate a little bit of income from that with my military pension. Together, I could have a comfortable life here in Tucson
Yeah.
and make a life here because I really liked Tucson. I like Arizona. So that's why I did it. So I started to put together the plan. Again, assuming I would be laid off. I just assumed it was going to happen any day. I had to have sort of something ready to go. And, and so I was, and there were other components to it that you might find interesting. One of them was, I'll never forget, another thing that drove me was that when I came out of the military and I went to Raytheon, I worked my ass off, really. And after a full year of just busting my balls, I got like this pathetic raise. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I've done all these great things. I've worked my ass off, and this is all you get. And other people that I had worked with who hadn't done squat got substantially higher raises. And I was like, this is bullshit. Like what? And the answer I got was, oh no, they drew out this curve and said, oh,
Right.
And the bottom line was that I realized that you were not paid for performance at all. And I'm a pay for performance kind of guy. I mean, I'm just I go after carrots, right? If there's a carrot there, I want to go eat it, right? And without that carrot, it's hard for me to get motivated. So I was like, okay, clearly this sort of a pay structure isn't for me. I'd rather succeed or fail on my own merits. So that was just a natural way of my thinking. Along with the other things I discussed, I started laying down a business plan for a wine company in Arizona, and it started out purely as a farming operation. We're just going to plant a vineyard. We were going to grow grapes and sell them, and that was it. And I had no interest at the time of making wine or growing the business at all. But that was the nexus. That was what started it, and that's how I got into it. And from there, the spark happened, and and then planting of the vineyard. That single event of developing that first vineyard drove the entire business, even up to the present time.
Really?
Yeah, it really did. And I learned, I knew a lot about the wine business back then. I thought I did, but truly I didn't.
Yeah. What would you tell, just a quick little question here while we're on the topic. What would you tell that version of Mark Beres right as you were planting those first rows of grapes?
Don't do it. Yeah, I'm serious. I'm very serious. Don't do it. If I could rewind my life, I wouldn't do it again. No way.
Why is that?
Well, because the wine business is very difficult to succeed in. It's very difficult. And there is a myth out there. People look at the wine business and they think that these wineries are just rolling in money and that they're selling $100 bottles of wine. And so they're, they look at all these movie stars and pop culture icons that own wineries, and they get this false impression that this is a big money industry.
Yeah, it's romantic.
Yeah, and it's romantic. It's beautiful. There's a regal nature to the product and all these things. The truth of the matter, none of that's correct. The wine business is very, very few wineries make money. Very few. Most wineries that I know of operate on slim margins, a lot of personal sacrifice. And, the personal sacrifices that I've personally had to make are substantial. Now, I've come to a point now where the wine business is quite significant. And don't take that to mean I don't love the wine business.
Sure,
I absolutely love it. But it is a lifetime commitment. It is not an in and out thing. It requires a profound amount of personal effort and attention. You can never escape from it. The wine business is consuming. It is very difficult to break away from it. Once you get into the wine business, it's very difficult to get out of it. And so the exit strategy for most people is probably the biggest challenge there is. And then wine is a long-term product. And so you make it and then you invest all this capital in this product and then you really can't sell it for years, right? So you're always doing this Kentucky windage thing, which makes it very risky, right? It's difficult to borrow money in the wine business. And so you need capital to grow, and it's very difficult to do that. So money is very hard to come by. The other thing about it is that, how do I put it? The risks are just overwhelming. The risks are overwhelming. And the other thing about the wine business, it's very difficult to sustain the energy that's required to keep going, right? Plus, another thing about the wine industry that makes it profoundly difficult is you can't scale a winery linearly. I can't go, well, you know what, Manny, next year I'm going to sell another 2,400 cases of wine. Therefore, I am going to invest, I am only going to plant these many grapes or whatever. It doesn't work like that. You have to grow a wine business in steps. So you do huge infusions of capital.
And is that because you have to plan it and you have to, it takes some time to sort of filter back?
It's exactly right. And the infrastructure to produce wineries are just unbelievably costly. So a tremendous amount of wealth and capital is sunk into property, plant, equipment, PPE.
I bet.
And so you have all of this money and this capital, and then you've got to sell so much product to just basically meet the fixed overhead, right? It's very difficult to do. So the wine business is a business that you need to be very, very careful. And there's a lot of people that project, false. They don't candidly talk to people about this at all.
Right. That's actually a really good segue. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of the big spirit companies are struggling right now because people aren't drinking as much, right? I mean, it's kind of a trend, if you will. Do you see that in your industry, in your particular niche?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So the demand for beverage alcohol has plummeted, right? Now, it hasn't gone away, okay? Now remember, we own restaurants too. And at our restaurants, we're moving through a lot of beverage alcohol and wine. So there's still demand out there. It hasn't disappeared, okay? But it doesn't take a capitulation of demand to really move the needle, right? So yeah, we've absolutely seen that. Yeah.
What drove you to go to add on the restaurant side?
So a couple things. One was just good fortune. It was timing. We found 2 restaurants that the owners wanted to sell, and we knew them. They knew us. We were a good fit, and we already knew their business, and it presented itself, and we studied it for about a year, right? And then we said, okay, this will work. What drove it for us was 2 things. Number one, realization that the wine business as is was going to take years to really regain a growth trajectory. So we're just going to have to languish along in a depressed market for years before we could regain a growth trajectory, right? So we had looked at doing more wine retail, but that was pointless as we saw it, because you're investing money and capital in a business that's flatlined, at least for the next 3 or 4 years. So not a good use of capital. But a restaurant, we looked at the numbers, we looked at the trajectory, and not all restaurants are created equal. And then, so we looked at these restaurants in particular, looked at their customer profile, their menus, we looked at their numbers, their sales, and looked at their staff, and looked at all these different things, their leases. And, we made the decision that it was a smart move for us, and so we put together a plan and we executed the plan. We were right. We actually scored a home run on the restaurants. Yeah. So that was a good move for us. In fact, today, really, you think of us as a wine spirits company, but really wine and spirits is, a small amount of what we do. It's probably about 20% of our sales now is wine.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Most of our sales is restaurants. Yeah. Well run, but restaurants are very difficult. They have their own challenges.
Oh yeah, they do.
Okay, Manny? And they're different. It's a whole different ball game over there. But restaurants can be successful. And I can't even tell you how many people I heard told me that just restaurants all fail. That is not true.
It's not true
at all. And it isn't even remotely true. And restaurants fail for different reasons than wineries fail. It's interesting to see the juxtaposition there of the two. And we've now operated the restaurants for almost a year, so we're getting smart at it now.
Yeah, and I think that my family came from restaurants. My grandmother had a restaurant for almost 40 years, and she had a steakhouse, and so there's a whole different set of problems, like you said, but also opportunities. I think there's new things that are in existence than when my grandmother had her restaurant. I just heard this crazy thing about Chili's, right? They were slumping, their sales were plummeting, and this one random influencer posted one TikTok video of her eating cheesy mozzarella sticks, and it reignited their sales, and it became sort of a very grassroots bonfire that reignited their business, which is kind of crazy.
Well, I'll tell you straight up, man to man, I'll tell you right now, the restaurant business that your grandmother knew no longer exists.
Yeah.
That, in fact, so we see this every day. And one of the things that benefited us is that we have not been in the restaurant business, that we're new to it. Because we're so new to it, we didn't bring all of this tribal knowledge of decades of restaurant operating metrics and norms. We came in basically from a winery where we had to execute with great efficiency and skill, stepped into the restaurant business. And what we found was what I just told you, that okay, we had to sit down with people and go, what you know of as the restaurant business no longer exists. It doesn't work anymore. You cannot succeed with the restaurant world of 4 years ago. The way restaurants operated 4 years ago no longer works. You will go broke. And a lot of people, I'm telling you, Manny, they just it hasn't clicked. Okay. You got to do things differently, man. We're just on this stuff. And I could go through some of those with you if you're interested. Like
sure, yeah.
Some of the big things that we've done.
Give me some examples.
There's great examples. Number one, no more cash. Okay. Restaurants, it depends on the restaurant, of course. Okay. But we stopped accepting cash on January 1st, like 3 weeks ago. We stopped to great success. Okay. We looked and we never handled much cash in the wine business at all. So handling cash was never an issue that we even focused on because there was so little of it that we had to deal with. It was easy. There were no risks. When we got into the restaurant business, wake up call. I mean, I about shit my pants at cash, this whole concept of dealing with cash. I couldn't believe, A, how much cash we had to deal with, B, the risks of using all this cash and the liabilities that it created. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, who? And I was like, why are people accepting cash? You don't need to. I mean, today, most people are trained to use their phones. Most people use Apple Pay.
Yeah.
They're accustomed to using credit and debit cards, Chime, other things. I mean, even people that traditionally couldn't get banked today can at least operate digitally.
Yeah.
So there's the amount of people that couldn't access credit cards or debit cards or whatever today can. And people are trained. They're trained in this. We notice this.
Plus your demographic is
right.
Not, yeah.
But ever since we went cashless, man, 100% success. We just all the numbers that we're looking at just went up, and it was a win-win for everybody. The staff did better, we did better, and we got rid of that entire liability. I mean, like in a lot of restaurants, I don't know if they're watching what we're doing, but we studied it for about 6 months, and then we moved. The other thing we did is we went to a tip sharing program, and I don't think the general public really knows the calculus of tips because it's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
I will tell you right now that the calculus of tips is among the most complex and potentially areas of liability in the entire restaurant business. Most employee lawsuits are over tips. So tips represent a massive, massive source of liability and risk for the business. Okay. Handling tips is very, very important. That has to be done absolutely correctly.
Right.
So we came into this, and what we found was generally appalling to us. It was and a matter of ethics, right? And as prices have escalated because of inflation, the amount of tips just go right with it. So the front of the house is getting quite a pay raise, leaving the back of the house really empty-handed. Okay, and the disparity between back of the house pay and front of the house pay, that delta just got too big for us. From a moral, it became a moral hazard for us. Okay. So we started a tip sharing program. The tip sharing program formalized it. We brought everybody in and we briefed them on how we're going to do it. We created a system that was fair to all. Our front house folks still got to keep a big percentage of their tips and they were still incentivized to provide good service and stuff. But it reduced that gross disparity in net pay between back and front of the house.
Right. I think it also wraps the entire house with a certain kind of motivation as well.
It does. It also brings a level of professionalism to the operation, and I think the staff appreciates that. The other thing that we did is we implemented data-based operating metrics. So this is something we did normally naturally at the winery, and we brought that to the restaurant business. And restaurants, I'm here to tell you, they operate on gates, and there's certain metrics, key metrics. I can go over them with you if you ever want to talk about them. But you have to define what your operating metric ranges are, and then you have to drive the business down into these ranges. And if you do not do that, the business will fail ultimately. Because if you don't develop a disciplined way of managing the business so that it operates within specific ranges in terms of key performance metrics, if you don't do that, the business will eventually fail. Manny, it will fail. Okay? And it has to be something that is a very disciplined and a dogmatic approach. It has to be like a religion.
Yeah.
Okay? And the reason is because it takes armies of people to run a restaurant. Everybody has their own self-interest in mind, right? You have to take care of the customer first and always, but you have to do this in a way that can keep the business down within these operating norms, okay? Great example for you is the prime ratio for a restaurant, which is you add your COGS ratio together with your labor ratio, and you need to keep that down around 55%, 55, maybe up to 60%. Okay. And when we came into this business, the prime ratio was like over 80%. I mean, we knew if we didn't aggressively move this down, we knew the business would fail. If the prime ratio stays above 60%, the business will fail. Okay. So it was a wake up call. So we had to literally come in and, we had to confront the existing culture that was there. Which is, that's a difficult
restaurant
job.
culture. I get it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we had to confront the culture, but we had to make a lot of staffing changes, of course, and then we had to basically drive the business down into these norms. We succeeded at it. It wasn't easy, but it was critical to position the business so that it could sustain itself. But on January 1st, we gave everybody pay raises. And I tell them like, hey, look, the reason we can give you pay raises is because we have created a sustainable business model here, right? We're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're not draining the business's operating capital to give you pay raises. And think about that. We gave out pay raises to people when the minimum wage soared to $15.45 an hour. Okay. And I don't think, Manny, I'm not kidding. I don't think the general public really understands how much raising the minimum wage drives economics.
Yeah, it does.
Because it creates wage compression, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? And it creates a host of problems that the restaurant has to bear. So there's an example for you, okay? Anyway, these are some things that we've had to confront.
Well, I love the fact that, so we did a podcast with Adam Hartung, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, when you were really deep in the wine and you had just created the distillery part of your business. And, At the beginning of this podcast, you mentioned solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, you approached this restaurant acquisition as a giant problem with smaller problems to be dealt with. What are the most important elements of leadership that you would say to maybe a young entrepreneur, somebody who is out there trying to cut their teeth in the world, based on your experience, recent and in the military, everything, based on your vast experience, what would you tell that young entrepreneur about business?
Well, you must learn to develop a vision. You have to. This is not negotiable. You must create a vision, and you must be able to communicate that vision to other people. Communication. I mean, reading and writing are our young kids in school should be writing. And teachers should be very wary of allowing them to use AI to do their writing for them. Young visionaries particularly need to learn to create a vision and then communicate that vision to other people. Period. And your vision can't be survival. And your vision can't be getting rich. So I would tell a young entrepreneur, what do you want to do? And then what is your vision? And if the vision sounds anything like survival or getting rich, then I would then tell them, go back to the drawing board, try again. Because wealth is a downstream derivative of vision, right? And vision is a sustainable, achievable end state for you in the business, right?
Right.
And so that's, in terms of leadership as a leader, my job is to create that vision and communicate it to other people. And then to motivate them, right? And then to motivate them to help you execute the company's operations in a way that create and make the vision happen. You have to have vision. You got to look at where you're going. What do I want to do? Why am I here? Why am I getting up every day and working my ass off? What am I trying to do?
Sure.
Right? Once you have a vision, Manny, I can give you some great examples of vision. I'm in business with my best friend. I mean, you know that, my best friend, Mark Mueller. We've been friends since we were teenagers, right? And Mark and I it's almost like we're Siamese twins sometimes, because it's, there's no competition between us when it comes to lifestyle, wealth, or any of that stuff. He has my tax returns every year. I have his. There's no secrets. He knows where my money is. I know where his money is. There's no jealousy there whatsoever, right? And sometimes, if he's going through a hard time or having whatever, I'm there to carry the load, right? And sometimes, even though I may be working more and working harder, but getting paid less, but it doesn't matter to me because I have a vision, right? And so I'm willing to sacrifice on my own end to help out my best friend because I have a vision of where I want to go, right? And I'm not impatient, and I've communicated that vision to him and others, right? But if I didn't have a vision, it would be very temporal. I would look inside, and it just wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And if my vision was survival, Manny, if your vision's survival, you're doomed. You're basically, you're done. Because if survival is all you're trying to do, then you're doomed. You really are.
Yeah.
And you know what? Look, I'm not immune to that. Sometimes I'm like, I just need to survive right now. The business, things are going hard and difficult. But I know that if I get into the mindset of just trying to survive the day, I know that is self-destructive ultimately, right?
100%.
Yeah. Then I have to communicate it. So communication is critical. You have to be able to draw it out, talk about it. Your vision should be something that is discussed often. And you should be very comfortable, and it should be relieving to talk about the vision with people. It should feel good to talk about the vision. Words like, this is where we're going. This is why we're doing this, right? And I've made a habit, a nugget of wisdom that I would throw out to entrepreneurs is whenever you communicate either directives or visionary things to people, right? I always try to finish in writing, usually with a paragraph or a sentence or two that explains why, and, like with our cashless system, when we announced to our entire company that we were going to stop accepting cash, I then followed up with it. Well, this is why we're doing it. This is exactly what's going on. And this is where we're trying to drive the company. Right. Mm-hmm. With menu, like right now, we're really working with our menus at one of our restaurants, and working with menus is a lot of work. I didn't realize how much goes into a menu.
It does.
A lot. It's a lot of work. Primary thing in a restaurant, the menu, right? But why are we making these changes to the menu? Why are we doing these things? Because they're cool? No. There's a vision. There's a vision there. This is where we're trying to take this restaurant. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway.
Oh yeah, but that aligns exactly with the way I run my businesses, and so I say that my job as a CEO is threefold. Number one, set and execute the vision of the company. So that means I got to figure out from within. I mean, I have a different situation because I'm running somebody else's company. I don't own the company. You own the company. A little bit different. But nonetheless, set and execute the vision. Number two, block and tackle. What problems we might draw up, I block and tackle. Whether it's a HR problem, legal problem, finance problem, whatever. And then the third thing is I try to raise my team members and encourage them and push them. Sometimes it's not necessarily standing on a pulpit and saying things. Sometimes it's more behind the scenes, but I think it's really important. Mm-hmm. As we start to sort of wind down the podcast here, if you look at your mentors in your business and historically, or people that you admire, and if you could sit down at a meal with somebody that actually from history, it doesn't have to be even business, somebody from history, somebody current now, whatever, who would you sit down with for that meal and why?
There are many, but I have a lot of respect for Elon Musk, quite frankly, and who is the guy who founded Patagonia? What's his name? He's not. I mean, he's kind of new in my. I mean, there's a book that's been recommended to me that I want to read that he wrote about something about surfing, or please free us and let us surf, or something like that. I want to read that. I haven't read the book yet, but I've heard a lot about it and some of the themes in the book, and I'm like, I want to read that. That guy sounds like an interesting guy to talk to. But I like Elon Musk. I think, I'm looking at him as the entrepreneur and the visionary, right? And the drive. And I'm fascinated by the way that he does it. The risks that he's taken are just amazing. And, the way that he didn't take no for an answer, and what sustained him through this stuff. And I look at Elon Musk, I'm like, that's like me. I mean, I share a lot of his, motivations. I do. He's not motivated by money, which is, everybody that hates Elon Musk, the guy's got quite the group of haters out there, right? But they hate him. They always talk about his wealth and, and him being a big rich guy and all this stuff. But if you actually listen to him speak, which I do a lot, he doesn't talk about his wealth ever. His wealth is really just a tool of him. I don't think he, at least maybe all I know is what I watch and read listening to the guy, and I don't think he's motivated by wealth.
No, he's not.
And I don't think a lot of people understand that. So when they attack him for being a rich guy, it just bounces off of him, because that's not what I don't think he cares about it. I think he probably has people around him that manage his wealth for him. And he probably, obviously he has more money than he would ever need. He probably doesn't know how much wealth he has from day to day. I think the whole thing about his CEO bonus or whatever that was that he sued over, I don't think it was about the amount of money. I think for him, it was what that said about him. I don't think it was the amount of money that drove that for him. I think it's kind of like Donald Trump in the 2020 election. I don't think people realize that what drives him to challenge that whole thing isn't the fact that that it was rigged in his opinion. It's that he doesn't want, or no, I think in 2016, he doesn't want people to think that, he didn't actually win. He says, I actually won this. I think that's what's important to him, right? So if you look at what's important to Elon Musk, those are the things that I focus in on. He's very focused on success. He's very driven. He brings people with him, and he's got this incredible vision. Like, I watched this great thing about like going to Mars, which to me just is nuts. Like, Mars is a big dead planet. There's nothing there. Why would anybody want to live there? What's the point? But when you start looking at what he's talking about, you're like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. But if you look at everything, and this is very interesting, Manny, I encourage you and your listeners to go look at this. If you look at every technological thing that Elon Musk does, every component is a piece of what is needed to establish civilization on Mars. It's fascinating. Like
the Boring Company,
the batteries, the rockets, the cars, the robots, every one of these things are a piece of that guy's vision of creating, basically establishing a human population on Mars. And you're like, and in his opinion, that is an important thing for him to do in his lifetime. And, and you could hate him for that. You can think he's crazy for that, but you can't deny that the man has put in place a clear vision and created the components needed to execute the vision, right? It's fascinating. I would love to sit down with him and talk about these things.
Oh, he's quite a visionary, and you're right. He's very misunderstood.
Yeah, and I don't hate people at all, period. I don't hate anybody. I try not to. And I'm not, I don't hold grudges against people I don't know simply because I may not agree with their political opinions or whatever. At this point in my life, I don't care about that stuff. I just care about learning. I think everybody has something about them that's valuable and interesting that I can learn from.
Yeah.
And I love all, serve all, and I can learn from all. That's how I look at it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for this conversation. I think definitely a lot of insights and motivation for those that are maybe on the line of whether or not they should start a business or how do they grow their business. I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Yeah. What a great forum. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right, brother.